Um, you have your priorities, whether you're focused on large scale migration, you're stuck there, or you have other considerations that are driving your priorities. And this conversation is being begun with you because you expressed an interest in emerging tech, and you're trying to understand what you could do with the advisory team in the context of your business priorities, right? So, where we start is to ground people on why emerging tech is something that they could look at. And this slide attempts to do that by borrowing on a concept, which is when businesses are looking for new growth, innovation is where they find the opportunity to unlock that new growth. And that innovation could be business innovation or technological innovation. And with the right conducive business environment, that new growth shows up, right? So our aim in this conversation with you as a CXO is to see how emerging tech can bring that continuous innovation to your organization. On the left, we have some components that usually allow businesses to be innovative. There are technological competencies. In healthcare, latest is like having mRNA technologies, right? How do you build these vaccines and these kinds of new kinds of medicines that were not built before? Business process competencies. How good are you with how you're exercising the design and the operation of your business processes? Knowing your customer, industry foresight as to where your market and your industry is headed, your ability as an organization to execute, and of course the depth and the capability of your R&D as aligned with the business. So this is a simple framework that kind of lays out these are the things that could be driving innovation. Now, we all know coming into the cloud, some of the friction in bringing these ingredients together and producing innovation has substantially reduced, right? And on top of that, we're making the claim that if you layer in emerging technologies, you're building on that cloud synergy across these ingredients to draw out innovation. And then the second theme we're bringing out is compared to the older world of having to deal with this innovation ingredients on a standalone basis and having to build large innovation projects to succeed. Because the threshold to get started is so much lower, especially in the cloud and with emerging technologies, our approach is to have a lot of experimentation, which is a lot of small projects, putting more into a portfolio model and managing that. So those are some of the key headline principles that we're trying to encapsulate into the ETAP framework. And then Sri asked me to take a spotlight on CX, given the large number of projects there. So I found a good paper from Oracle on it. So I'm grabbing some information from there here. Um, so then we come to the next PRFAQ question, right? So, okay, emerging technologies are relevant. They can bring innovation much more rapidly, especially in the cloud. But why should I work with AWS? Why can't I work with HPC startup or a quantum startup or go and work with an AI best of breed company, right? So our response to that viewpoint is that we offer probably the most comprehensive emerging tech portfolio when you look at each of those capabilities, each of these technologies to go into full production settings, right? So it simplifies the number of vendors you have to deal with, and there's also homogeneity in how your emerging tech platform can evolve across all of the use cases that your business might come out with. And in addition, obviously, we provide envisioning, solutioning, and readiness assessment. And we're talking about teams beyond just our advisory team, right? So on top of all of that, now we're trying to introduce the ETAF framework, and it's essentially a customer value realization kit delivered by advisory services partnering with others, and it's aimed at unlocking emerging tech. It's at least we are starting to frame this as a ideation and a prototyping um, kind of competency to bring to your organization around emerging tech to pick winners. We're also bringing some portfolio management expertise, kind of along the lines of how venture capital chases ideas. We're using that to bring that into entrepreneurship, which is inside the enterprise entrepreneurship, around picking projects and how not to make large bets, but go for small, many bets. And we'll bring that kind of thinking into structuring this, especially because emerging tech has a risk reward profile that's different than trying to lift and shift, right? And of course, the transformation strategies that affect emerging tech are quite different, and there's a lot of culture and capability development that goes along with it. So the idea is, by engaging in this, a customer who's stuck on their transformation or stuck on their migration, who has some interest in emerging tech as being relevant in their market for their business, can pivot with us and see substantially more growth with these emerging tech projects under such a framework. Now, barriers to the adoption of emerging technologies, there's clearly a lack of familiarity and insufficient competencies in emerging tech. When you go deep into the organization, that usually holds up any idea to actually take root and be realized in the cloud. There's also typically customers don't have the time or the bandwidth to go and get connected to the entire emerging tech ecosystem. Like, for example, if you take something like IoT, there are various device form factors, there are network elements, there's edge elements, there's the whole distributed element of it. So the ecosystem has tens, if not hundreds, of players that one has to be aware of to really construct a great solution. And that's where working with somebody like us under an EDAF framework suits getting past that barrier. And there's, of course, the fear of failure. The risk profile is so much higher. So the typical stance is to wait it out for a technology to be embraced and successful. So the success rate is much higher. And that ends up throttling the innovation potential and the growth potential from that innovation from emerging techs in that substrate, in that business, right? So, um, so the question then comes up: how can emerging tech adoption framework as a mechanism energize the growth engine for organizations? And we're still toying with what exactly gets into this, but the general thinking is it needs to have executive visibility from a sponsorship side, and we'd also want them to invest quite a lot of time in terms of reviewing what emerging tech projects are kind of taking root as part of this. And the three main pillars, align, launch, and scale, have various capabilities that we'd like to bring. So the align capability, it can work with customers who are either stuck on one emerging tech, not knowing how to proceed and realize it, or it can, even better, it can take an approach of going and seeking all emerging tech ideas within the organization that the executive wants to accelerate. And we run with the advisory team, we run a due diligence around these ideas, and then we run a selection process for the business after having established the right kind of innovation framework. If their existing innovation framework is ready and the maturity is there, great. If it's not there, we step it up, working alongside them, giving the necessary workshops and training to achieve that. And in the context of that, a few of these projects then graduate to two pizza teams that are then green lighted for a very short 4 to 8 weeks, where working alongside prototyping resources, whether from a delivery side or from elsewhere in AWS, we'll start to see realization of it alongside the customer. The advisory elements there would clearly be to monitor and to bring the expertise in from the emerging tech side by being the advocates for these efforts. And also, there are agile and product based thinking that could be injected into these phases. And at the back end is where, with the executive involvement, we recommend a milestone or a threshold check where which of these prototypes or pilots or MLP MVPs actually graduate to a scale phase where they can get substantial investment to go quote unquote global or market wide, as the context might be for their specific solution. And then beyond that, we have the optimize function, which is to take this innovation and just not stop with that one run through it, but create the flywheel with the momentum, right? Where this becomes a part and parcel of their culture and then kind of grow from there. So I want to pause here and see if anyone's got like reactions or questions on some of this.
So Madhu, just a quick question or observation. Um, we are pitching that these will be a set of mini projects, right? It's placing the bets. Now, we are assuming that there is a certain budget that is allocated for, let's say, R&D, right? Or exploring new technologies. Certain industries may not have that the luxury of that spending money on new initiatives or innovation. So, for example, refining, right? They operate on wafer thin margins. So, I mean, we may want to just see what the correct messaging is, and maybe have a different set of messages depending on industry to see what resonates and what's palatable to that particular industry.
Absolutely. I mean, the definition of how much of innovation is different across industries and specific companies in those industries, right? Um, like in oil and gas, the downstream is running on razor thin. Most of the innovation is finding the right kind of fields. Whereas a technology vendor like a Schlumberger, it's all about the technology, right? For them,
That's right.
the innovation stack is quite distributed across all of the functions that they have, right? So
That's right. Yeah.
adjusting the message, the
Yes.
adjusting the message is a big part of this, and that's why we're saying this is very much. It's not yet even consolidated. Like all of the
Yeah.
experiences that Sri and Damu and the team have had so far, we're trying to still inject it in, but it's
Sure.
it's it's kind of like at least giving depth to it, right? We're not just saying we want to see emerging tech adoption. We're saying how we want to see it happen.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
also kind of starting to characterize what are the settings in which we can start these conversations, right? Um, and then that kind of tees up well for like some core differentiation, right? Like we understand that with emerging tech, there's some hesitation because of the risk involved. We are we are starting to think that experimentation with strength in numbers, which is instead of putting two bets and trying to win one of them, we're saying go with 20 bets and maybe get one or two wins, but the wins are going to be explosive, right? That's how venture capital works, right? You place bets on like 30, 40 different companies, and one of them ends up becoming a Snowflake, and the second one is Databricks, and so on, right? And another one is Stripe, right? So, and also fail fast or succeed. Due diligence, especially because the competency is not there inside the business. Bringing AWS advisory, emerging tech experts in and running the due diligence brings a whole new layer of risk mitigation. How many times have you heard AI and ML thrown in contexts where they probably are not yet ready for it, right? Take any emerging tech. It tends to get forced into situations where it may not be appropriate or it has to be seen in a different alternate realization, right? Um, and also failing fast or succeeding in the context of taking an idea and maturing it to realization, right? Whether we call it piloting or MLP or prototyping, whatever the favorite word is, right? Proving it in production at a small scale before the big second stage of investment comes in. And then executive sponsorship, where executives are not looking at it as some small project running in the periphery of the organization, but it is where their growth is is going to get unlocked and where they're going to leap ahead of the competition. And then we start to spell out how all of this could be offers and how some of these offers could sit alongside existing offers like PMT offers like Idea Accelerator that we discussed could also be injected alongside it. We could also put cloud operating model when it comes to the scale side of things. And of course, product engineering and management, where there's no existing two-peat of product-based thinking, right? So that would then drive like what are the kind of assets we need. Now, one of the good topics to focus on at this point is so there is the ETAF, and this is going to start to lay out how all of emerging tech can be embraced in an organization that wants to go on this journey with us. But then within that framework, there are going to be distinct projects, and some of these projects can have one emerging technology or a combination of emerging technologies. And that's where getting these delivery kits to be also knowledgeable and familiar with each emerging tech's upstream and downstream is where like the work streams that we talked about really make sense. Like a great example with AIML, have you actually brought all of your data together centralized, or is it all sitting in OLTP databases all over, and only your data warehouse has only got like a partial view and just a partial function within marketing when you're trying to improve your supply chain, you know? So that kind of prep, lead up steps and maturity steps for each technology could be worked into the qualification for example, the AIML delivery kit, right? So that's how at least the early thinking is that while this is at the category level of emerging tech, we could have each technology and the work streams fit their elements into this, whether it's in the align stage or the launch stage or the scale stage. And the last slide we have is just kind of emphasizing that earlier chart where we had optimize at the end and the innovation continuing after that. Um, this meshes really well with our work on cloud operating model and getting to that next level from a transformation standpoint for the business in succeeding not just with the cloud but also with these emerging technologies driving the growth, and alongside that our capabilities and functions like with product engineering and management in bringing success out of projects, whether they're emerging tech or cloud projects, as we kind of move forward.